Well, it's a new year, which can only mean one thing for incredibly lucrative pharmaceutical companies that have made record profits during the coronavirus pandemic. It's time to raise prices, and they're doing so on literally hundreds of life-saving drugs. And it's not just one pharmaceutical company, it is several of them, and the number of medications that are set to increase in price is likely to grow in terms of like the list of drugs that will be more expensive for Americans moving forward. Now, what does the data say? How many drugs in particular are being impacted by higher prices? Well, pharmaceutical companies increased prices on 460 drugs on January 1st, with most prices up 5% to 6% on average. So, which drugs exactly are included in these price hikes? I actually want to start off with Gilead, which is an unfortunate name for a pharmaceutical company. It's an unfortunate name for any company, but nonetheless, they have increased the price of HIV drugs to the tune of 5.6%. So if you are dependent on Biktarvy or Descovy, you're gonna pay more for those life-saving drugs. And if you're fortunate enough to have health insurance, let's be clear that the cost of your premiums and your prescription copays are likely to go up as a result of these types of price hikes. Let's move on to Pfizer, which has in fact made record profits during the coronavirus pandemic thanks to their coronavirus vaccine. Well, Pfizer decided to increase the cost of their breast cancer drug to the tune of 6.9%, and also 6.9% increase on its Prevnar vaccine, and 4.4% on the costly heart drugs that are listed there, Vyndamax and also Vyndaqel. And that's not the only pharmaceutical company that's increasing prices. We also have Vertex, which has decided to increase the price of its cystic fibrosis medication to the tune of 4.9%. And of course, there's a huge issue with that. In addition to the price hike, there's the issue involving how they have monopolized the market in regard to cystic fibrosis medication. It's already an incredibly expensive drug with a list price of $311,000 per year. Now, how do they justify this? I mean, we're talking about companies like Pfizer that have made record profits. Why would they need to increase the price of these life-saving drugs? What excuse are they giving? I mean, they're shameless. They use the same tired excuse over and over again. We need research and development money. I mean, what could we do? We need to price gouge the American people. We need to price gouge Medicare in an effort to raise enough revenue to develop new life-saving drugs. Yeah, except anyone who's paying attention can't possibly buy that. Why do I say it? Well, the reason why I say it is because you take a look at their record profits, you take a look at how much they're paying their executives, particularly their CEOs. And I would argue that, maybe the money could be spent elsewhere if they're, so strapped for cash on research and development. Now, one statement from a Pfizer spokesperson was this: the modest increase is necessary to support investments that allow us to continue to discover new medicines and deliver those breakthroughs to the patients who need them, said a Pfizer spokesperson. When posed specific questions about various rebates that could be offered, the spokesperson said, "We do not disclose detail at that or at the product level." So let's take a look at what their profits are. If you look at Pfizer specifically, Pfizer said it expects a total of $36 billion from the coronavirus vaccine for all of 2021, just from the COVID vaccine alone. And it said, based on contracts it now has signed, it expects revenue $29 billion from the COVID vaccine in 2022. So they're expecting to make even more money, more profits off the coronavirus vaccine in 2022. And to be sure, the coronavirus vaccine is incredibly important. Luckily, you can get the jab for free for now, but to say that Pfizer needed to jack up the prices of other drugs offered by the company in order to make enough money for research and development is laughable. In fact, Pfizer does spend a considerable amount of their resources on their CEO. So why don't we take a look at the pay for the Pfizer CEO? Pfizer Inc. paid Chief Executive Officer Albert Bourla $21 million in total compensation in 2020 alone. $21 million in total compensation in just 1 year, 2020. The overall pay package, which included salary, bonus, stock, and other incentive pay, represented a 17% increase from Bourla's compensation in 2019 when he was paid a total of just 17.9 million. I mean, what could they do? They really want to focus on talent retention here, and it really does take a talented individual to be as callous as this CEO, someone who is willing to jack up prices on life-saving medications, knowing that individuals who can't afford those price hikes are likely to be physically harmed as a result. Some could die as a result. That level of callousness really is a talent. It really is a skill within the pharmaceutical industry. Now, the Daily Poster also reports that corporate Democrats are heavily influenced, and this shouldn't shock any of you. They're heavily influenced by pharmaceutical companies, which might have something to do with the fact that so many of these corporate Democrats in Congress fought aggressively against the provision in the Build Back Better agenda that would have allowed for lower drug prices, that would have allowed for Medicare to negotiate for lower drug prices directly with pharmaceutical companies, which, by the way, as it stands today, they are barred from doing. So a top Democratic Party media buying firm, Canal Partners Media, is placing ads for drug industry front groups that want to block Democrats from lowering drug prices as promised in the Biden reconciliation bill. And we've talked about the Biden reconciliation bill, the so-called Build Back Better agenda, in great detail on this show. But for those of you who might want a quick update, that bill is dead. Congress has decided to shelve that legislation because they just refuse. Corporate Democrats refuse to fight for the very agenda that Biden claimed to be supportive of. It's Biden's agenda, but we haven't seen much of a fight coming from President Biden either on that front. Now, Canal Partners also started buying ads late last month for the Coalition to Protect Access, CPA, another apparent pharma front group. CPA has already bought $3.2 million worth of ads for December and January. Now, what do those ads look like? I'm a little curious. Why don't we take a look?
Today, vaccines and antivirals are helping fight the pandemic because scientists and researchers in America's biopharmaceutical industry acted fast after investing billions over years to achieve breakthroughs. But now, Congress is threatening legislation that will devastate private industry's ability to fund treatments just like these. What's at stake isn't corporate profits, it's public preparedness. Tell Congress to oppose legislation that would harm our ability to fight pandemics, paid for by Coalition to Protect Access.
And of course, there are a few things that we need to clarify in response to that ridiculous, deceptive ad. Number one, we already see these pharmaceutical companies bringing in record profits and paying their executives handsomely with that money instead of really focusing those resources on research and development. Also, in terms of research and development, a lot of that money does come from us, the US taxpayers, through the National Institutes of Health. So the federal government provides seed money, provides the research and development funding for these pharmaceutical companies to develop drugs that we so desperately need. In fact, a considerable amount of our federal resources went toward developing the coronavirus vaccine. So this argument that, oh my God, look, but if we change this system so Americans aren't price gouged on life-saving medications, well, we just might not ever develop medicines again. That might not ever happen again. What can we do? We have to do this. We have to price gouge you, even though Americans pay on average 2 to 3 times more for these pharmaceutical drugs compared to other developed countries. Which is why many Americans travel to other countries, whether it be Mexico or Canada, to get access to the life-saving medications that they so desperately need. And while it might be easy for the Democratic Party to immediately point fingers at the Republicans and GOP lawmakers for their corruption and their cozy ties to the pharmaceutical industry, let's make one thing absolutely clear. Republicans, I think, are pretty clear about who they are. Okay, they don't hide who they are. They don't hide how they're pro-business, pro-corporations, anti-worker. I mean, they might use populist rhetoric here and there, but at the end of the day, when you pay attention to their actions, when you pay attention to their rhetoric overall, in general, they're pretty clear about how they favor corporate interests over their own constituents. But it's the Democrats who present themselves as warriors for the workers, as warriors for their own constituents who have been price gouged by these pharmaceutical companies. They consistently campaign on reforming healthcare. They consistently claim they're in favor of universal healthcare. But when push comes to shove, as soon as they're in a position of power, what do? Oh my God, the Senate parliamentarian is stopping us from being able to do this. Oh my goodness, what could we do? We really tried to convince Manchin and Sinema with carrots after carrots after carrots, no sticks though, to support this legislation, but they don't want to do it. So we're just gonna shelve the legislation, the Build Back Better agenda. They always find excuses. And then once we get closer to election time, what do they tell us? If we just had more feckless Democrats in Congress, we would actually be able to accomplish something. Please vote for us. We haven't actually delivered on anything that we campaigned on, but please vote for us. Democrats are in for a political bloodbath in the midterm elections. And they have no one to blame but themselves. But to be sure, they'll blame progressives. They'll blame people like us who criticize them for discouraging voters from showing up to the polls to vote for them. They'll find all sorts of scapegoats, much like Hillary Clinton after her massive fail in 2016. But fact of the matter is, you can't just consistently campaign on being a warrior for the little guy and then turn around and disappoint again and again and again. And it's also not gonna work to consistently make the right wing the boogeymen. If you're not gonna have something positive to campaign on, don't get upset when voters are not persuaded to show up to the polls because Republicans are so scary. That did not work during the 2016 presidential campaign. It is not gonna work moving forward. If they're gonna campaign on these big promises, they need to deliver. And I'm sick of them lying and thinking that they can get away with it. Remember, it's the Democrats in charge right now, not Republicans. Democrats hold the levers of power and they're failing us again. And they only have themselves to blame.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.